Hey guys, it's Randy with Lowbuck LS here again, and this week we are going to work on putting the 4L60E transmission together. You can see all the parts and stuff behind me on the workbench there that in the last video we disassembled it all. So this week we're gonna put it all back together. I've got a kit from Summit Racing here that has all the new clutches and pistons and seals and everything. So we'll flip the camera around, we'll get that kit opened up, and we'll get to work putting this 4L60E transmission together. Okay, so like I said, there's all our transmission parts on the bench. And there is our kit I ordered from Summit Racing. There's a part number SUM-705066, and you'll see, you can't actually really see it because it's under the Summit logo, but this kit is actually for an 04 Plus. So I don't know if I ordered the wrong one or what, but I think it'll still work. The only differences, I'm pretty sure, are the newer 4L60Es, like 04 and newer, have a different seal where the pump goes into the body. There's like a metal seal or something. The new ones don't have this O-ring, so this O-ring won't be in that kit, but the O-ring that's on this pump is still in good shape. And then the other thing that'll be different, the valve body gaskets will be different, but these valve body gaskets didn't get torn or anything when I was taking it apart, so I can either reuse those or just order some valve body gaskets separately. So we'll get this kit opened up here. And even though it's sold by Summit, I guess it comes from Alto. And it does have the high energy piston kit as well. There's the package with all the seals and O-rings and valve body gaskets and all that, but like I said, these valve body gaskets will be wrong for my year 2000 transmission. Got in here. Okay, so I'm trying to do stuff with one hand. That looks like our pistons. Yeah, one of them is going to be the low reverse piston, and I'm not sure what that other one is. There's our pistons anyways. There's all our thrust washers and stuff. Here's our band, which I'm pretty sure is what was slipping and causing me to not have second gear. There's a bushing kit, filter, and all our frictions and steels for our clutches. And like I said, those are the Alto high energy clutches, so should be a bit of a performance upgrade. So now let's start putting this stuff together. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do before we put all the parts back into this case is test the 3-4 accumulator check capsule assembly. So basically it's in this port right here. You can see that check ball in there. Whoops, dropped my phone. And then in the servo bore here, you can see right there is that check capsule. So to test it out, we're gonna pour in some of this. It's basically a mixture of transmission fluid and mineral spirits. So we're gonna pour it into this, the top of this check valve, and it's normal for fluid to come out of this servo bore, but there shouldn't be any fluid leaking out of this spot in the case. So we'll pour some fluid in there. it is coming out of the servo bore. And right now, there's just a drop or so. I'm gonna pour a little more in there. And I've dumped more in there, and you can see transmission fluid starting to run down the wall of the case there. So that tells me that 3/4 accumulator check capsule is leaking, which could have been what contributed to my problems with line pressure. So I've got a new one here. AC Delco part number 8634400, and that's what it looks like. So we're gonna try and pull that capsule out of there. Okay, so to get this 3/4 accumulator check ball capsule out, I've threaded a 3/8 by probably about a 4-inch bolt into the old one in the case here, and then I got this from Princess Auto 9-piece slide hammer dent puller kit. So basically one of the parts in this kit is this L-shaped piece like this. So I'm basically going to drill a hole in this L-shaped piece so this bolt will fit through it, and then we'll try and use that slide hammer to pull that 3/4 check capsule out of the case, and then we can drive in this new one. And there you can see I've got that 3/8 hole drilled in this tool for the end of the slide hammer now. So I'll take this bolt out and put this tool on there, and then we'll try slide hammer it out. Okay, I've got the slide hammer on there, so we'll see if we can get this check ball capsule out of here. Not really working all that great, actually. I'll try to put my foot on it. Go. Bit of a battle, but we got her. Now I'll try, we'll drive that new one in. So to drive this new check ball capsule in, I'm going to use a 3/8 drill bit and just use the back end of it. As you can see, it's exactly the same diameter as that check ball capsule. So we'll drop the new capsule into its bore there, and then I might blunt the tip on this drill bit, so I might have to sacrifice this bit. So we'll just drive it in until we kind of feel it bottom out. Feels like it's bottom there now. Just give it a couple taps more. Now we'll do that test again for fluid leaking out of that check ball capsule. Okay, so now that we got that new check ball capsule installed, we're going to do that same test and dump some of this mixture of 50/50 transmission fluid and mineral spirits. Dump it in there, and same as before, it's okay for it to run out of the servo bore, but it shouldn't be running out of this port in the case right here. So we'll try that. And it is running out of the servo bore, but not running out of the case right there. Okay, next thing we're going to do is get ready to put this low reverse piston back in the case. So first thing to do with that is we'll get these old seals off of here, and then I'm pretty sure these are the new seals here, but we'll pull the old seals off and then compare them with the new ones here, and put new seals on. Seal matches up. Seal. New one looks a little bit smaller than the old one, but maybe the old one is like stretched or something. And that seal looks the same. So I'm just gonna grab some like lubricate grease and grease those seals up a little bit. Just putting a little bit of grease on them. Put a bit of grease around the bore there too. I'll grease up this next bigger one. And we'll put it on. Same deal, I'll just put a little coat of grease all the way around the outside of it. I'll do the same thing with this big seal that goes on the bottom there. Same deal, I'll just put a bit of grease around the outside here. Okay, I think I'll position the camera a little better so we can see inside the case here, and we'll get ready to put this low reverse piston in. Okay, so we're looking down into the case, and if you can see that notch right there, that is where this little tab on the low reverse piston has to fit in. So I'm going to put some of that lubricate grease on the inside of this bore and the outside of this bore where that piston slides in and out, which corresponds with where these seals are, and then we'll slide that piston down into the bore there. So I got that low reverse piston started in the bore there. Now I'm just going to tap it down with the output shaft here. About as far as it's gonna go. So we got that low reverse piston tapped down in there as far as it'll go. Now we'll take, stick on my air hose here, this low reverse spring cage, put it back in there, and then we'll grab that spring compressor that I built during disassembly and compress that spring cage and get the O-ring on there. Okay, I got my spring compressor on that low reverse piston return spring. I'm going to crank it down to compress that spring. Okay. And now I've got that spring compressed as far as it'll go. So now I'll try put that snap ring on. Okay, so we got that low reverse piston return spring and snap ring in there. So next piece we're going to put in is this output ring gear and the thrust bearing. So made sure the thrust bearing isn't worn, and this side has to go against the output ring gear. So when we put it in the case, we're going to put it in this way. And now we'll put that output ring gear in. Whoops, a little clumsy. And then it should, just turn the key, focus. It should spin in there pretty freely, so which it does. And now that we've got that output ring gear put in the case, we're going to put in this rear planetary and the thrust bearing for it. So same deal, the thrust bearing goes on this side, goes against the planetary, so it's going to go in the case like this. And sit right down in there. I'll put this rear planetary in. Easier said than done. So rear planetary in, and that thing should spin freely as well. So now that we got that rear planetary in there, we're gonna work on putting the low reverse clutch plates back in. So here's the old stack right here, and I got my new out of my Summit Racing rebuild kit. So the steels are going to be these bigger ones in the back here, and I think the fiber ones are going to be these ones here. So. Okay, so there's our old low reverse clutch pack. So, and there's our new steels and fibers for the low reverse, and there's that wavy cushion plate or whatever it's called. So first thing we want to do is make sure the number that we're putting back in is the same as what we're taking out. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steels, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fibers, and here we've got 5 steels and 5 fibers. So we're also going to check it's going to be a little tricky here with having one hand on the camera. So our caliper's zeroed there. So yeah, we're 86.5 thou on the old fibers. We'll measure one of the old steels. We're 68 thou, 67 thou on the steels. Now let's measure a new fiber. Same, 87.5 thou. Whoops. 87 thou. So based on those measurements, these old fibers aren't worn at all. So that tells me that the problem wasn't in the low reverse clutch pack. Now let's check one of the steels. Make sure we're still reading 0 when the calipers are closed. And yeah, we're 66.5, 67 thou. So plates are all the same thickness from the old clutch pack to the new one. So now we'll go ahead and start putting that clutch pack in. So first plate to go in is that, yeah, I think it's called the wavy plate or whatever. And then when you're working on the side that has the valve body facing you, there's this one little tab on the plates, and that always goes down at the 6 o'clock position with the plate to the left, so just like that. Okay, I guess you're supposed to soak these new fiber plates in fluid before you put them in. So I've got the transmission pan all cleaned out, so I'm basically just going to dump a bit of clean new fluid in there. And then I can put these fiber plates in there and let them soak for, I don't know, 10 minutes or something. I'll just make sure they're all covered up there. So it's enough to cover them all, so we'll let them soak for 10 minutes or so. And then these new steel plates, like if you notice the old ones, they kind of had this orientation notch on there, but the new plates, new steels don't have that, so I'll just have to remember to put them in. Like there's a big gap with no teeth or whatever, and then there's this like a 1-inch gap or so, so that has to go in. So we've already got that wavy cushion steel or whatever it's called in. So this tooth right to the right of this 1-inch gap has to go down right in there like that. Okay, so we got all 5 steels and all 5 frictions in. So we started out with that wavy cushion plate, and then a steel and a friction and a steel and a friction, so on and so forth, ending up with a friction on top. So now all our steels and frictions are in, and you should still be able to turn this, but you'll just feel some drag from the frictions dragging on the steels there, but that feels about right. Okay, next thing we're going to do is put this, I think this is called the case silencer spring or whatever, and it goes down. It's kind of hard to see, but fits right down in there like that. Now we'll put this low reverse roller clutch in, and there's like a wide tab on it right there that lines up with that wide part in the case, so we'll put that in now. So I put the camera down at the end there, and now it's started to rain pretty hard outside, so probably hear some rain in the background, but so I had to give that roller clutch a good push to kind of slip past that case silencer spring. So now that it's seated, we're gonna put in this big snap ring that holds it into place. Okay, so we got that big case snap ring around the outside there. So next thing we're gonna do is check for a bit of end play on that low reverse clutch. So if you look right in there, you can see the clutch pack, and try and position the camera a little better here, but you can see we've got probably over a 1/16 of end play there. So actually I've got a narrow feeler gauge set here, so I might use that to those will fit in there. So we'll see how big of a stack of feeler gauges here it takes to take up the slack in those low reverse clutches, and that'll tell me how much end play I have. So we got just over 60 thou of end play because I've fit in the 30 thou and 32 thou feeler gauge, and I can just rock it up and down just a bit. So I think that's about the right amount of end play in the low reverse clutch. Okay, and now we're going to actually test how that low reverse clutch applies by putting air into that port right there. You should use like a rubber tipped gun, but I don't have one, so just wrapped electrical tape around there, but we should still be able to see that clutch. It is, and you can see the piston moving there. So piston's not stuck and seems to be moving about the right amount. Okay, now that we got that low roller and body snap ring in, we're going to work on putting in the sun shell and forward planetary and ring gear and sun gear. So there was this black 4-tab bushing, I guess, but there's a new one that came with the kit here, so we're going to put that on, just on that race on the roller clutch right there. And then we're going to put the sun gear in place there. It kind of just meshes in with the gears in that rear planetary there. And we're going to put the sun shell in, and I've inspected it. I guess this is a fairly common piece to break or strip out there, but mine still looks okay, so I can put that sun shell in. And there it just fell into place. And then there was this 4-tab thrust washer deal, but I've got a new one of those as well, so we'll put that in. You can see the 4 holes for it in the sun shell there. So now that we got that sun shell and our 4-tab thrust washer in there, we're going to put in our reaction shaft and our front planetary. So put the reaction shaft in. Hear it lock into the splines there, and you can hear that roller clutch. So it turns in that direction clockwise, but won't turn in the counterclockwise direction. Now we'll take, gotta make sure that thrust washer is on our front planetary, which it is, and we'll put it inside the reaction shaft. So looks just like that. Okay, so the last thing we have to do for this back half of the transmission is put the output shaft in. So I've got the transmission laying on its side here again, and just slide that output shaft in. And there you go. Output shaft is in. Now there's a snap ring that needs to go on inside that front planetary there to hold the output shaft. Okay, so we got that output shaft shoved back in there. Now we got this little O-ring to put on it right down there, so we'll get that put on now. Okay, so we got that snap ring on the output shaft, so that basically wraps up the back half of the body of the transmission. So now we'll start working on the front half, which is that input drum and all that stuff. Okay, now we're gonna work on the input drum. So I've just got it kind of between 2 tables, so the input shaft can hang between the 2 tables there. And now, I guess I missed this during the disassembly video, but the 3/4 clutch here is still, hasn't been taken apart yet, so that's the first thing we're gonna do. Is somewhere here, yeah, there's a gap in this big snap ring around the edge of the input drum, so we'll pull that out, and then we should be able to pull our 3/4 clutch out. And apparently that's fairly common points of failure on these 4L60Es, so be curious to see what kind of shape that is in. So we'll do that now. Okay, so we got our 3/4 clutch out, and they actually don't look terrible. There's some black marks on the steels, but I measured the frictions and they're still 67 thou, same as a new one. So that wasn't what had failed. It may have gotten hot, like I said. There's some discoloration on the steels, but there's still fiber on the fiber plate. So now we'll carry on and take this next snap ring out of the input drum here. Okay, so we got that forward clutch snap ring out of the input drum now. Now we should be able to pull this whole assembly out. Oh, and we got some clutches coming along for the ride. That would be the backing plate there. And then we can pull our, as usual, our fibers and our steel plates out of there. So we'll get those ones out and have a look at them. So we got that clutch pack out and they all look fine too. So now we got another spring to compress. So we'll use that spring compressor I built in the last video there. And I think, but we're gonna have to cut this bar a little bit longer, and we'll basically put the snap ring back in the case, and so we'll have the snap ring in there and the bar will sit up against that snap ring, and then we'll use the threads to compress the spring there. So we'll get that set up now. Okay, so I cut a piece of square tubing that is 6 1/16 of an inch long, and that just fits into the case there. So we'll lock that in there with this O-ring, and then I cut a real narrow get this out of here, but this should fit right on that spring cage there, and then I'll drill a hole in the middle of this piece and lock the threads onto there and compress that spring cage. So I'll get the rest of this built and then we'll show you how that's going to work. Okay, I've got that spring pack compressed there. Had to build a custom wrench to get in there and turn that nut underneath that beam, but we got that spring compressed now, so we should be able to get that snap ring out and take that spring and piston assembly out of there. Okay, we got that spring pack out of there, C-clip out. Now I think we can just flip this input drum upside down and bang it, and those pistons and stuff in there should come out. So here's our piston assemblies. Another spring cage. Just make sure none of them are broken. And I think I got all new pistons with that kit, so we'll have a look at that and then start putting this input drum back together. Okay, so we got our 3 new pistons there, but before we put those in, we're going to, there's a O-ring seal around the base of this input drum here, so I'm going to pull that out, and then we're going to find the one that matches up in our overhaul kit here and put a new one of those on. And there's a new O-ring seal, so we'll put that on and I'll grease it up a little bit. Okay, I got that center part all greased up. I'm going to change out this little seal here. I got the new one that came with the kit. Come on, get in there. I've greased up the inside of that 3/4 piston bore. So I've got my new 3/4 piston here. I'm going to grease up both the inner and outer lip seal on that, and then just put it into the bore down at the bottom there. And now you can see I've got that 3/4 piston installed in there. Okay, this is the forward clutch piston, so we're gonna lubricate that up, and it goes in this forward housing here. So, and I've heard it's tricky to get in there, so we might use like a feeler gauge around the edge to try and work that seal in there. So first we'll get it greased up, and then we'll try and get it in its housing there. Okay, we got that piston greased up and in its housing, and got these surfaces greased up. So now we're gonna put this in the applier ring like that, and put the whole thing I have to put my camera down here, but basically, oh, there it goes. So we got that forward piston in there. Okay, now we're going to take this overrun piston and grease up both the external seal and the internal seal, and then put it inside that forward piston. Alright, we got that overrun piston in its bore there. So now we're going to take this overrun return spring and the snap ring that goes with it, and we'll use our compressor tool here again. We'll compress that overrun return spring and get this snap ring on there. Okay, we got that last return spring and snap ring in there. So now we're going to get a couple overrun frictions and steels, and put in a steel and a friction and a steel and a friction, and we'll soak them frictions in our clean transmission fluid in the pan here. So we'll get that going next. Okay, first plate to go in is one of these overrun steels, and they go in. You put these two small tabs in those grooves like that, and it just sits down in there like that. And then I got a couple of them overrun friction soaking there, so put one of those in, put another steel in, and then another friction plate. Okay, so we got those two overrun steels and overrun friction plates in. Now we're going to put this thrust washer, just make sure it turns good. And that thrust washer is going to go right there. And then we're going to take our sun gear and line it up to try and get, yeah, there we go. Get the teeth engaged with those two friction plates there, but we got her now. Okay, so we got that forward clutch applier ring in there. Next one that goes in is one of those wavy steels. I don't know if you can see it very good here, but that one's not straight anyways. So that goes in there like that. Next one is a flat steel. I've got new ones here. And then I'm going to put my rubber gloves on and alternate and put one of those forward clutch friction in, another steel, another friction, until all 5 of my steels and all 5 of my frictions are in the stack. And there you can see we've got all 5 steels and all 5 frictions for the forward clutch installed now. Now we're going to put in this forward clutch end plate, and it goes in just like that, and then we're going to put in our snap ring. Okay, so we got that snap ring in. Now I'm just checking the end play of that forward clutch, and I've got between that snap ring and the end plate there, I've got a 10. Let's see if we can 10 and 15, so that's 25. And then in between the two, there's a 12, so 37 thou. And they say you want between 30 and 65 thou of end play in your forward clutch pack, so we should be good to continue on assembling. Okay, next thing we're going to do is put in this 3/4 apply ring, and it goes in like that. And then we got our 3/4 clutch friction soaking there. Okay, so we got that 3/4 clutch apply plate and our first friction in. I'm gonna put our first steel in, and they go in just like that. So with one steel, and put in a friction, and so on and so forth. Okay, next thing we're gonna do is put in, there's these 5 spring assemblies, and they go in just like that. So we'll put in the other 4 here, and then we'll put in our end plate. Okay, now that we got that 3/4 clutch pack in, we're gonna put in the end plate, which goes in like that. And then we'll get this snap ring in, and then we'll use the feeler gauges to check our end play. Okay, I must have screwed up in my measurements here, because I got that backing plate and snap ring in, and I've got way more than the 85 thou. I've got like well over 1/8 of an inch, so I'm going to take that out again and put in this extra steel and extra friction and see if that takes up that extra space in there. So I took that snap ring out, put that extra friction plate and steel in there, and now I'm only at 32 thou for end plate. And to finish up assembly of this input drum, we're going to put these washers back on. There's like a flat washer that goes there, and then this thrust washer that goes on there. So should be it for the input drum. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is start putting this low reverse input drum together. So I got the old one all polished up, and it doesn't look too bad until I like set a flashlight up there, and then somewhere I got a straight edge here, and if we look at that, there is a bunch of light coming through. So basically this reverse input drum is no good, worn out, so I ordered up a new one from Rock Auto. It is, part number is A74556B. So we will get that new reverse input drum out of the package and start putting it together. So before we get that new input reverse drum out, we're going to take this piston out of the old one and pull this external seal, and there's an internal seal there, and we've got some new ones here. I think that's the external one and that's the internal one, so we'll put some new seals on there, and then get this new reverse input drum out of the package here, and put that piston with the new seals inside that new reverse input drum. Okay, so we got those old lip seals off that piston that goes in the reverse input drum, and got that new, or the piston with the new seals installed into the new reverse input drum. And it was actually a big pain to get that piston in there because of that lip seal, so I ended up using that feeler gauge to kind of work my way around the edge of the seal there to get it to fit into the bore. So now we're gonna put in the right here, we'll put in the snap rings, the return spring and the snap ring that goes in there, and I'll use my spring compressor to compress that spring and get that snap ring seated in there. So we'll do that next. Okay, so we got that return spring and snap ring in. Now we're going to put in this Belleville spring, and it goes with the lip facing down on the outside. And then we're going to put in a steel, and then I forgot to get these going, but we'll soak our friction plates in the new transmission fluid again. So I'll dump a little more fluid in there so those are covered, and then we'll just alternate here. So we got that Belleville spring and one steel in there, and then we'll just put a friction and a steel and a friction and a steel until we've used up our stack there. Okay, so we got 4 steels and 4 frictions in there, which is same as what came out. But the weird thing is there's still a couple friction plates left over, so I'm going to put in this backing plate and the snap ring, and then we'll just measure our end clearance there and see where we're at. And once again, we've got about 32 thou of end play in our clutch, so seems a little tight, but I don't really know how I can change that, so I'm just gonna leave it and live with it, see how it works. Okay, now that we got the clutches put in our reverse input drum, we're gonna put the reverse input drum onto the input housing here. But first we need to put on, I think this is called a selective washer. So we'll put that down in there. And then there's this thrust washer that goes on top of it. And in the kit, I don't have it right here, but there's different thicknesses of selective washers here. So if your end play isn't right, you can adjust the thickness of that washer. But we'll go with the one that came out of there for now. And then we'll put that thrust washer in there. Now we'll flip this input or reverse input drum around, and so those notches in the fiber plates have to engage with these teeth, I guess, on the input drum assembly. So we'll flip that around and put it on top of there. And now we've got that reverse input drum assembled the way it needs to be on top of the input housing here. Okay, now that we've got the input assembly and reverse input drum together, I've got the transmission case back on the bench here. So we're gonna lift that input assembly and install it in the case here. So the 3/4 clutch friction plates that are inside that input drum assembly got to line up with those splines on that assembly in there, and then these notches on the reverse input drum have to line up with those tabs on the sun shell. So we will see if we can get that put together now. So it might be a little tricky getting these splines lined up, so kind of wiggle it and turn it and lift up a little on it. Okay, I think I finally got all those 3/4 clutch friction plates engaged with the splines, because that drum assembly is now below the lip of where the pump needs to bolt up to. So I think that's good to go. Okay, I'm at the point where I would be ready to put the pump back in, but as I'm doing this rebuild, I'm also going to be installing this Sonax Performance Pack. I'm going to do a separate video on it, but yeah, it's a Sonax, basically a shift kit. And before I put the pump in, there's a couple parts in here. There's a boost valve, which I believe is in that bore right there. I think that's the spring for it. And there's also a pump slide valve in this Sonax Performance Pack that goes inside the pump. So in order to change that out, I'm going to have to break apart the pump here. So I think there's these 5, I think they're a 13 millimeter bolt to split the two pump halves apart, and then we should be able to get at that pump slide spring. Okay, so like I said, we'll be covering this in a separate video, but we've got our high RPM pump slide spring installed and a new boost valve and spring. There's the old one installed. So now we're going to put this pump back together and get it installed in the case. Okay, so we got this pump pretty well ready to go in. I've got a new gasket and O-ring that goes around it, and then there's a plastic thrust washer type thing that we'll put in. But before we put that pump in, we've got to put our band in that goes around the drum, so we'll do that now. Just like the friction plates, I will soak it in my pan of fresh transmission fluid here. So we'll get it soaked, and then we will put it in, and it just goes around the drum here. And this part goes towards the servo here, and this part here is where that anchor pin goes. It's going to go in basically like that, but like I said, first we're going to soak it in some transmission fluid. Okay, so I got this band soaked in some transmission fluid here, so we'll try and get that put in here. Oops, bumping the camera. Okay, that's pretty much in place there. I'll just take the camera off the stand here for a sec, and we will just have a look here. So we want to make sure that this anchor pin is lined up right, so basically just gonna move that where it needs to be. You can see that anchor pin. Oh, not watching the camera. The hole for that anchor pin is where it's supposed to be. And then I'll just look in the servo end here, and it looks like the part that the servo is supposed to press on is in the right spot. So now we'll put this anchor pin in. Okay, I got that anchor pin in, and I'm verifying that it is in the right spot in the band. I can push it in a little bit and can see that it's engaged in the hole in the band there. So now we should be able to go ahead and put this pump assembly in. So I've got a new seal I'm going to put around the pump. I thought maybe because this Alto kit I got from Summit was for the 04 and newer, it wouldn't have this O-ring seal in it, but it does, so we'll put a new one on. Alright, so I got that new O-ring seal put around the pump. I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on it and then put a little bit of grease in the bore. You can see I've got the new pump to case gasket installed in there. And then there's also this thrust washer deal with these two little plastic nubbins on them. So I'll put some grease on there too. And then there's holes right there that go between the pump and this reverse input drum. So, but I'll put a bit of grease to hold it in place while I put the pump assembly in. Okay, I got everything greased up, and I've got that plastic thrust washer deal with some grease on it so it won't fall off. O-ring seal is on there with a little bit of grease on it. New pump gasket is in the case, so we should be able to set this pump into place here. I think that's about as far as it's gonna go. Looks like it's, I thought this part was flush with the case, but must not be, because pull the camera out for a second here. If you look in here, it's butted up with where it needs to be. So now we'll grab them pump to case bolts and figure out what they need to be torqued to. We'll put those in. Okay, so we're gonna put in these pump to case bolts, and it looks like the torque is 220 inch-pounds on those as well. So got them all started by hand. I'm not gonna go too hard with the impact on them. I'll just till they basically touch. I'll kind of do it in a crisscross pattern. Now I'll kind of see how they feel with socket. Same thing, I'll kind of go in a crisscross type pattern, just a little bit at a time. All fairly snug there, so I'll get my torque wrench, and it is already set to 220 inch-pounds from the last, and we'll just have to hold the same deal. We'll kind of go in a crisscross pattern here. I think I've got them all. I'll just go around one more time to verify. So there we go, all torqued to 220 foot-pounds. So I think the last thing we got to do for this internal part of the transmission, all the parts that are inside the case and not in the valve body, is just put this little O-ring on there, and then we got to check our end play. I can feel it's got a reasonable amount there, but we should probably measure that and make sure I kind of like to know what it's at. So we'll put that O-ring on and then we'll check our end play. Okay, so I got that little O-ring on there. We're gonna check the end play, so I'm just gonna give her a couple whacks with a rubber hammer to make sure the shaft is all the way that way. And then I'm gonna clamp the vice grip onto the shaft right flush with the stator support there. And bring it out as much as I can, and then we'll just measure the gap in there with the feeler gauge. And it looks like I've got about 16 thou of end play there, so that's a little bit tight, but I think it'll be okay. Alright guys, so we got this transmission, basically everything that's inside the case, all the clutches and steels and frictions and drums and everything that's internal to the transmission is done. So we're gonna wrap it up for this one. Next couple episodes, basically we're gonna work on the valve body section and finish installing this. We already put a couple parts from this Sonax Performance Pack into the pump, but we're gonna do the rest of the parts that all go in the valve body here. And then I've got a couple of these, let's get the lighting so you can see it. But anyways, I've got a couple Sonax 4th gear super hold servo, and I think it might have been the servo assemblies that were not providing enough pressure on that band around the reverse input drum, which might have caused my transmission failure. So I got a 4th gear super hold and a 2nd gear super hold servo. So those will be the next couple episodes. But yeah, we'll keep plugging away. Thanks for watching and commenting and subscribing. And yeah, I'm hoping in the next couple days we'll have this transmission all together and back in the truck, and we can take it out to the track. So thanks again. We'll talk to you on the next one.